Title this the Korean War. Korean War. Basically, now that Truman is in charge, FDR's gone, World War II is over. Now we're going to have another huge issue we've already talked about. Our next enemy has kind of presented itself as with, or in the Soviet Union with Joseph Stalin. Korea would occupy Truman's time as president pretty much all the way through. But Truman also had some other problems. 1949, spies tell Truman that there was an atomic explosion in the USSR within the last few weeks. The Soviets announced that they had the capability since 1947, but the actual test was in 1949. Korea is known as the land of the morning calm. Okay, and this calm will be broken in the 21st century. And now we have to deal with that we don't have that atomic monopoly anymore. The Soviets also have that ability. So we have to, the chess game begins. This is also called, the Korean War is also called the Forgotten War, because we don't hear too much about it. And we'll talk about why later. 1910, Japan occupies Korea and stays there till the end of World War II. U.S. and Russian troops swept the Japanese out of Korea at the end of the war. And this kind of plays into, why we dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, because we didn't want to share this area like we had to. We didn't want to share Japan like we had to share Korea. 1948, the Republic of Korea, ROK or ROK, is the south. Okay, this is the area south of the 38th parallel. You're going to hear that quite a bit. This will be led by Syngman Rhee. Okay, this was the democratic part of Korea. Here's Syngman Rhee. There's her flag. Okay. And in the north, you had the People's Democratic Republic, Kim Il-sung, who is the grandfather of North Korea's leader now. The plan was to eventually unite Korea. In 1947, the UN sent a commission to supervise elections and assist in forming a unified government. However, the North refused to cooperate, and elections were only held in the South. Okay, the U.S. and the UN recognized a new government in the South and President Syngman Rhee. But we've seen this in the North. We've seen it elsewhere. The Yalta Conference, remember that Stalin actually refused to allow free elections in Europe too. So this is nothing new to us, but it doesn't make us very happy. There's the flag of the North, and there's Kim Il-sung. Okay. Here's Kim Il-sung, there's Kim Jong-il, and then Kim Jong-un. And that's the guy that's in charge right now. Dictatorship, but also dictatorship that has been passed down through their generations. 1949, U.S. and Soviet forces leave. Okay, the U.S. withdrew its occupational forces and gave them economic and military aid like we did pretty much everywhere else. The Soviets lead as well. But while the Soviets were there, they built up a very strong army. Okay, it will be a puppet government. And before they withdraw, they're going to build their army up. Okay, so as they leave, the North has this massive, strong army, and will continue to also maintain their economic and political ties as well. This day is known very famously in Korea, 6-25. June 25th, 1950. That is the day that the war began. The North invades the South. The UN Security Council orders the fighting halted. That's what the UN. We're going to see the UN's powers tested right away. The biggest thing with the League of Nations was it was weak and it couldn't enforce anything. The UN's going to show that it has a little more power. So the UN Security Council orders fighting halted and troops withdrawn. North Korea ignores. So the Security Council is called into sessions, ordering fighting halted by the invading forces, and they had to withdraw back past the 38th parallel. North Korea, once again, ignores them. Truman now orders U.S. and sea forces to cover and support the South Korean forces. We now have an Air Force. We have an official U.S. Air Force, which was formed in 1947. So there you go. But how could the UN send troops with the Soviets being part of the Security Council? Remember, the Security Council, it has to be approved, but also the members of the Security Council can veto it. It only takes one. Okay? There were 52 out of 59 members approved. 42 nations will eventually send men and materials. The war is fought mainly with American and Korean forces. But, it still answers that question. How could the UN send troops with the Soviets being part of the Security Council? Because they have to have a unanimous decision. It just so happens that the Soviets, at this point, because of their stance, because of the UN stance against North Korea, the Soviets were boycotting the UN. So the security, the Chinese, France, Russia, Britain, and U.S., those are our Security Council members. Besides Russia, everybody agreed to that, which is interesting too, because China agreed to it as well. We'll talk about that later. So we are going to see the UN enforce their will here, using mostly American forces. General MacArthur is named the commander of UN forces. And in September of 1950 at Busan, the North, equipped with tanks and other modern weapons supplied by the Soviet Union and China, which is awkward because they approved the UN, the North quickly captured the capital city of Seoul. Okay? So, once again, we're a little bit late getting into this thing. In 3 months, the North had pushed the UN forces to the small part of southern Korea called Busan. And I'll show you right there is where they were. Okay, this is just a quick timeline of what exactly happened. But right there is the Red Army of the Communist Koreans have almost taken the whole peninsula. In mid-September, MacArthur launches his counterattack finally. He landed 50,000 Marines and infantrymen at Inshan. I think I got a map. Oh, I thought I had a map of Inshan. Okay. Here's Inshan. And 150 miles north of enemy lines. He surprises them. And this was the major turning point in the military situation in Korea. Inshan was the turning point of the military situation. October 1st, all of South Korea is taken. You'll see this on the map. In early October, they go into North Korea. MacArthur drives invaders back across the 38th parallel. There's the 38th parallel. And starts pushing toward the Yalu River. The Yalu River is right here. Okay? This is China. So this is going to come up to a big question here in a second. MacArthur says we'll take it all by Christmas. MacArthur was authorized to move forces into North Korea and believed that all enemy resistance would be ended by the holiday season. And frankly, it was looking pretty good. If you look on this map again, you'll see it. We are definitely pushing our way there. as we show you once you see all the green up here. Here we are, November. But then the Chinese invaded. The Chinese had been giving the UN warnings not to invade the North. MacArthur thought it was a bluff. He was wrong. And even if it wasn't a bluff, he believed that they can handle him. The UN troops had advanced near the border, and then the Chinese invaded with 300,000 troops. 300,000 troops. The UN troops were outnumbered hundreds to one. The Chinese then pushed through, crossed the 38th parallel, and advanced 70 miles into South Korea before being stopped. I mean, you can see a lot of movement on these lines. If you just follow this, a lot of movement. So the Chinese now just rush, basically, push past the 38th parallel, and creates another issue. Okay? Truman and MacArthur are now at each other's throats. Things not helping. There's Inshan. There's pictures of the invasion. They began to have their differences. Mack said we must attack the bases in China because that's where the troops are coming from. He thinks they should be able to do that. Truman was concerned about World War III and said if China and the Soviet Union were good friends and they already had treaties, that we could be in for some problems. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Omar Bradley said it would be the wrong war at the wrong place and at the wrong time with the wrong enemy. So Mack begins to go over Truman's head, and he wrote letters to members of Congress about it. So that's a big no-no. So Truman fires Mack for insubordination, which means he didn't follow orders. The official reason was he was unable to give his wholehearted support to the policies of the U.S. government and the UN in matters pertaining to his official duties. Basically, he's fired for not listening to Truman. Okay. Mack, however, returns a hero. People loved him. Okay. In fact, when he came back, there was a big parade for him in New York City. At the same time, in Washington, D.C., Truman was throwing out the first pitch of the season for the Washington Senators. He got booed. So you can see the difference there. General Matthew Ridgway will replace him. Okay. In July of 1951, and for another 2 years, peace talks will resume. The talks begin and will be on and off for the next 2 years with some sporadic fighting in between. Future President Eisenhower, as he is running for president, makes his promise that he will end the war. He will personally negotiate and end the war. Okay? That is his plan. He is personally going to negotiate and end the war. And he will actually go there after the election in December of 1952 to negotiate that. In March of 1953, Joseph Stalin dies. Okay? And the new leaders were a little bit more friendly. Okay? The guy that succeeds him is Malenkov. Malenkov. And they're a little more friendly to the West. They're not like Stalin. They're not paranoid. Okay, and there is some mystery behind Stalin's death. Okay, we know that he was planning another major purge, but it didn't happen. He did supposedly die of natural causes, but there are some questions out there. Ike actually threatens to use nuclear war to bring the war to an end. And finally, in 1953, an agreement in Pamajan was agreed to. Big problem was prisoner exchange. Okay, the Reds demanded that the communists demanded that all North or Chinese prisoners of war be forced back to their countries. The West, or the UN and the US, said they should have the choice. Finally, they do agree to voluntary repatriation, which means being sent back. They recognized the division of Korea at the 38th parallel, and the U.S. promises to help South Korea in case of an attack. So those are the big things of the agreement: exchange of prisoners, recognize the divisions, and we'll promise to help them out. And we are still there. Okay, we are still there. It's a modern day picture, and we're going to show some of this. This is kind of cool. We'll talk about this later. Each side withdrew a mile and a quarter from the final battle line. That's called the DMZ. North Koreans and the Chinese could stay in South Korea. The anti-communists, that's part of that repatriation. Here's the casualties, though. Okay, so basically, in those years of fighting, the line stayed the same, which is why we call it the Forgotten War, because nothing really happened. 1.3 million communists were casualties, 410,000. Okay, we lost 54,000 Americans in the fighting. Okay, $22 billion. And like I said, this is still going on. It's a peace treaty. It's a ceasefire, basically. But this is still going on, and we'll see we're going to see this in a video. We'll show the border, what the border looks like today. And as you know, issues have continued to happen. All right, that is all. Stay classy. Vandalia.